Have you ever wondered why the history of events that supposedly took place just 100 or 200 years ago feels so murky, so contradictory, so full of holes? You're not alone. Across the world, people are waking up to a disturbing reality. The official version of our past, the one taught in schools and universities, the one presented in textbooks as unquestionable fact, is riddled with impossibilities, absurdities, and blatant fabrications. These aren't minor errors or gaps in knowledge. They are deliberate, systematic distortions designed to hide something so massive, so earth-shattering, that the entire timeline of human history had to be rewritten to conceal it. What we're dealing with here is not a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy fact. An entire field of study has emerged in recent decades, what some call alternative history, devoted to uncovering what was deliberately erased, distorted, or replaced in the historical record. And the deeper researchers dig, the more stunning the discoveries become. Entire decades have been cut out of the timeline. Whole civilizations have been written out of existence. Events have been duplicated, shifted in time, and attributed to different places and people. The scale of this forgery is breathtaking. It's nothing less than the greatest intellectual crime ever committed against humanity. The mechanism of this deception is ingenious in its sophistication. The forgers didn't simply invent history from thin air. That would have been too crude, too easy to detect. Instead, they acted with surgical precision. They took real events, actual historical occurrences, but transplanted them to different times and places. They changed the dates, altered the names of rulers and nations, switched geographical locations, but kept the essential structure, the plot, the sequence of events intact. Preserved was carefully curated, edited, and in many cases, forged outright to present the Russian Empire in the light the new regime required. This wasn't a one-time event. The falsification continued for decades, right up until the Khrushchev era. During that period, under the convenient pretext of fighting Stalinist excesses and architectural eclecticism, thousands upon thousands of unique buildings and structures were demolished throughout the Soviet Union. Ancient cathedrals, palaces, entire city blocks of classical architecture gone, reduced to rubble and carted away. Why? Because these buildings told a story that contradicted the official narrative. They were physical evidence of a past that had to be erased. We can trace several distinct waves of historical rewriting. The first occurred in the 15th and 16th centuries, associated with the names of scholars like Scaliger and the work of the Jesuit order. These were the master forgers who created much of what we now call ancient history, backdating medieval events to construct a false timeline stretching back thousands of years. The second wave came in the late 19th century, when the Russian Empire itself engaged in sanitizing inconvenient aspects of its own past. This is the period we'll focus on most closely tonight. The third wave was the post-revolutionary rewriting we just described, when the Bolsheviks remade the history of the empire itself to legitimize their seizure of power. And there was even a fourth wave in the 1990s, when the collapse of the Soviet Union triggered yet another rewriting, this time of Soviet history itself, as the new Russian Federation sought to distance itself from the communist past. But if the official chronology is such an elaborate, multi-layered fabrication, what is it hiding? What event could possibly be so massive, so consequential? This is the physical evidence they couldn't erase. You can bury documents, rewrite books, destroy archives, but you can't hide an entire buried layer of every city on the planet. It's still there, silent witness to a catastrophe that official history refuses to acknowledge. But how do you hide an event of this magnitude? How do you explain away buried cities without admitting what caused them? The answer lies in one of the most brilliant manipulations in the history of forgery: a chronological shift. an artificial insertion of time itself into the historical record. The catastrophe, according to this reconstruction, occurred in the year 1824. But to conceal the cataclysm and the chaos that followed, the forgers employed a stunning trick. They performed a chronological leap of 18 years. The year that should have been 1825 was relabeled 1842. In effect, 18 years of actual history were deleted, erased, removed from the timeline. The resulting gap was then carefully filled with duplicate events, insignificant incidents, and fabricated details designed to create the illusion of continuity, to make it seem as though time had flowed normally when in fact there was a massive hole in the record. This isn't speculation. The evidence for this 18-year shift is scattered throughout the official documents of the era, hidden in plain sight for anyone who knows where to look. Take, for example, the Holy Alliance. This was the confederation created in 1815, immediately after the defeat of Napoleon. It united Russia, Prussia, and Austria under the leadership of Russian Emperor Alexander I. This wasn't a loose diplomatic agreement. It was effectively a unified state, a confederation that ruled all of Europe from a single center of power. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Historians tell us that in 1833, this very same Holy Alliance was created again. An emperor who held real authority over the entire structure. And that capital, that seat of world power, was St. Petersburg. After the defeat of Napoleon, who in this reconstruction appears not as an external enemy but as one of the empire's own tetrarchs, one of its 4 regional rulers who attempted to seize absolute control, power was consolidated in the hands of the victorious triumvirate, and at the head of that triumvirate stood the Russian Emperor Alexander I. St. Petersburg became home to representatives of all the great aristocratic families of Europe. They came not as foreign diplomats but as servants of the empire. They served not Russia as a separate nation, but the unified structure, the Holy Rome, under the ancient symbol that had represented it for over 1,000 years, the double-headed eagle. Official history, of course, offers a very different explanation for how this symbol came to represent Russia. But the facts suggest something far simpler. It was the flag of the unified empire. And Russia wasn't just one nation among many flying this flag. Russia was the core, the heartland, the administrative center of the entire world order. In this context, a phrase that has always puzzled historians takes on a completely different and perfectly logical meaning. Russia was often called the gendarme of Europe. Official history treats this as a pejorative term, an insult hurled at an aggressive militaristic state that suppressed freedom and democracy. But what if it's not an insult at all? What if it's a precise, literal description of Russia's function within the empire? A gendarme is a policeman. Russia, as the heartland of the Holy Rome, was exactly that. The enforcer, the keeper of order, the authority that maintained peace and stability across the Confederation. When unrest broke out in the territories, when rebellions threatened the established order, Russian troops were dispatched not as foreign invaders but had been waiting in the shadows made its move. If such a powerful civilization existed, one that ruled the entire known world from a single capital, then who destroyed it? Where did the force come from that could challenge this seemingly unshakable order? How did a new power, operating from the shadows, suddenly emerge to organize simultaneous revolutions across the entire European continent, plunging every major capital into chaos within the span of just a few years? The answer lies in London. While the catastrophe devastated the heartland of the old empire, burying St. Petersburg, Moscow, Berlin, Vienna, and Paris under layers of mud, the British Isles were remarkably, almost suspiciously, spared. Perhaps due to geography, perhaps due to something else, Britain suffered minimal damage compared to the apocalyptic destruction that struck the continent.
And in that moment of vulnerability, when the old order was reeling, struggling to recover from the flood, a new ideology was unleashed. Not an army, not a military invasion, but something far more insidious and far more effective. A set of ideas: liberalism, democracy, republican values, the rights of man. These weren't abstract philosophical concepts. They were weapons, carefully crafted and deliberately deployed by a rising merchant class, the bourgeoisie, whose center of power was the City of London. On one side stood the old world, aristocratic, hierarchical, symbolized by the yellow and black imperial flag of the double-headed eagle, a world of hereditary nobility, of ancient bloodlines, of stability and order maintained through tradition. On the other side, the new world, merchant, bourgeois, symbolized by the red, white, and blue tricolor, the colors of the French Revolution, which were now newspapers, pamphlets, manifestos that frame the existing order as corrupt, tyrannical, illegitimate. Third, you organize mass protests. You get people into the streets. And fourth, once the protests reach critical mass, you escalate. You turn peaceful demonstrations into armed confrontations. This playbook, which we've seen used repeatedly in the 20th and 21st centuries, from the CIA-backed coups during the Cold War to the color revolutions of the 2000s, was pioneered in the 1830s and 40s, and its architect was London. The goal was crystal clear: remove the old imperial aristocracy from power across Europe, install bourgeois governments, parliaments, constitutions, republics, all nominally independent, but in reality aligned with and subservient to British interests. And it worked. Not everywhere, not immediately, but the damage was done. The unified Holy Roman Empire began to fracture. The old order started to crack. Russia, as the center of that old world, attempted to stem the tide. Troops were sent to Prussia and Austria to help suppress the rebellions. And for a time, order was restored. But the cracks had appeared. The unity was broken. The process of disintegration, once begun, could not be reversed. But here's the question that should haunt anyone studying this period. If the official history is a fabrication, if these events were backdated and distorted to hide the true timeline, is there proof? Is there a smoking gun? A document so obviously forged that it exposes the entire lie? There is. And it's hiding in plain sight, published on official government websites, taught in history classes, cited by scholars who somehow never notice the glaring, impossible anachronism that destroys its credibility completely. The document in question is an imperial. The purpose of altering the document. The goal was to obscure the true status of the Russian emperor. In 1848, Nicholas I wasn't acting as the ruler of a single nation-state called Russia. He was acting as the head of the Triple Alliance, the supreme authority of the Holy Roman Empire. That's why in the original texts, in many official documents from this period, the emperor refers to himself not in the singular I, Nicholas, but in the plural, we, Nicholas. This we isn't just a royal convention. It's a direct indication of his status. He speaks as the head of the Confederation, representing not just himself, but the collective authority of the three emperors who ruled the alliance. The forgers replaced this language. They made Russia appear as one power among equals, a concerned ally helping its friends Austria and Prussia, rather than the dominant center of a unified empire making decisions for all its territories. The truth, the picture of St. Petersburg as the capital of the world, the seat of power from which all Europe was governed, was carefully painted over, because admitting that truth would raise too many uncomfortable questions. Questions about what happened to that world, questions about who destroyed it and why. The revolutions of 1848, or rather 1830, in the real timeline, were only the opening move. They weakened the old order but didn't destroy it. The Holy Roman Empire was cracked but not shattered. Russia, Prussia, and Austria still stood. The aristocratic world, though battered, endured. But the new power, the London-based bourgeois order, had achieved its first major victory. France, the westernmost pillar of the old empire, was torn away. Napoleon III, a puppet of British interests, was installed as emperor. And now this predatory alliance, Britain and
with advanced architecture, complex administrations, and enormous populations. The catastrophe annihilated them. Almost overnight, densely populated regions became virtually empty. Cities that had stood for centuries were buried or abandoned. The survivors, few in number, scattered. And into this power vacuum, like predators sensing weakness, moved the forces of the new order. Britain, which had been largely spared by the catastrophe, and its newly acquired ally France, immediately began an aggressive campaign of colonization. This wasn't the gradual expansion of trade and influence that historians describe. It was a land grab, a coordinated operation to seize and occupy the empty territories before anyone else could claim them. The partnership between Britain and France was formalized not just diplomatically, but financially. After the 1848 revolution, or rather the 1830 revolution in the real timeline, France transitioned from the Second Republic to the Second Empire. The president, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, the nephew of the famous Napoleon, crowned himself Emperor Napoleon III, and he did so with London's full support. This is a crucial detail. Unlike his uncle, who fought against Britain and tried to create a French-dominated European order, Napoleon III was a British asset. His entire career bears this out. He had repeatedly attempted to seize power in France, launching coups from bases in England. When he was finally overthrown in 1870, he fled to England and lived out his remaining years there, protected and pensioned by the same forces that had elevated him to power in the first place. Under the leadership of this Franco-British alliance, a massive reconstruction effort began in France. In an incredibly short period, cities destroyed by the flood were rebuilt. Paris was trying to occupy the empty heartland of Eurasia, drawing new borders, carving the ruins of the Mughal and Ottoman empires into spheres of influence. The maps of the late 19th century show this process clearly. Lines drawn across deserts, boundaries that ignore rivers, mountains, and traditional territories, artificial divisions imposed on a blank slate. But was the catastrophe of 1824 the end of it? Was that single impact, devastating as it was, the only blow the world suffered? Or were there more to come? The answer, horrifyingly, is that the cosmic bombardment wasn't over. The impact of 1824 was only the first act. Comet Biela, as it approached Earth, had broken apart. The first wave of fragments, the largest pieces, struck the planet in 1824. But the rest of the comet didn't disappear. It entered an elliptical orbit, circling the Earth like a swarm of debris, periodically returning to rain down destruction. These fragments, still in orbit, may explain one of the strangest phenomena of the mid-19th century, the so-called London tides. These were unexplained surges of water, not related to the moon or normal tidal patterns that struck the Thames with disturbing regularity. They occurred roughly every 4 years. Could this have been the orbital period of the debris field? Each time it passed close to Earth, fragments would burn up in the atmosphere or crash into the surface, causing tsunamis and floods. The second major wave of impacts came in the 1870s, and this time the target was North America. Historians record a series of devastating fires that struck major American cities in rapid succession. Chicago in 1871. A fire so intense it's said to have started when a cow kicked over a lantern, a laughably inadequate explanation for the total destruction of a major city. Baltimore, San Francisco,
all burned to the ground in fires described as alliance. The last vestige of the unified empire had disintegrated. Russia, Germany, and Austria-Hungary now existed as separate rival powers. But even in this fragmented state, they posed a threat, because they remembered, because in their archives, in their traditions, in the blood of their aristocratic elites, the memory of the old world persisted. And so one final act was necessary, one last great war to erase that memory forever. The First World War was not, as we're taught, a tragic accident triggered by the assassination of an archduke. It was a carefully engineered operation, the final solution to the problem of the old aristocratic order. Britain executed a brilliant and ruthless strategy. It drew Russia, the core of the old world, into an alliance, the Entente. It positioned Russia as a partner, an ally, fighting alongside Britain and France. And then it maneuvered Russia into a war against its former partners, Germany and Austria-Hungary. The old alliance, the remnants of the Holy Roman Empire, were pitted against each other. The result was predictable. The war was devastating. Millions died. The aristocracies of all three empires were shattered. But most importantly, at the end of the war, all three ceased to exist as coherent states. Germany, defeated, was carved up by the Treaty of Versailles, its monarchy overthrown, its territory divided. Austria-Hungary disintegrated into a patchwork of small, weak nations, and Russia, having been bled white by the war, was finished off by the Red Revolution, a revolution that, not coincidentally, was supported and financed by the same British interests that had orchestrated the conflict in the first place. The Bolsheviks were useful idiots, a tool to destroy the Russian Empire